pockets of gas underground, and they like squirt water in there, like really high pressure water, and it shoots it all out. So that's like the big general idea, I think.
Okay. Anyone else?
It's like they drill like miles and miles down into the earth, and they shoot like water, sand, all that into these rocks to break them apart, and then once you break them apart, gas is released and it comes back up to the surface.
Yeah. And there are some chemicals in there that they, so gas, water, sand, and chemicals.
Oh, chemicals, yeah.
Okay. Let's see. In the reading, we'll start with the reading first, just to go over it. Who wants to give us a summary of like the fracking section on it, if you read in it? Like, what were some of the things that it talked about? Like the history of it. What'd you learn from it?
I learned that it's kind of new, and it's becoming more popular, and it has its trade-offs. But for the most part, it's in the Midwest states, Texas and Arkansas and kind of that area, and it's very useful, but it also can become very. It can mess with the habitats and people living around, so it has its positives and its negatives.
Yeah.
Adding on to that, like I learned that as far as drilling rights and everything goes, it hasn't picked up in places like Europe yet because of the laws. They can, like say, they find over here, if they find a reservoir over here, if it's on somebody's land, they got to pay that person to miss on their land. But see, over here in Europe, they haven't got that. It's not like that. They can just go over there and inconvenience the homeowner and not give them a dime. So it hasn't picked up in like Europe yet, good because of that reason.
Yeah. And
I learned that it could cause like small earthquakes, and that like over the past like 90 years, scientists like realized that conventional oil and gas production causes small earthquakes too.
Some people are worried about the gas that's released. They're worried about that gas seeping into like water systems. But that one of the things that drillers have done to combat that is recycled that water and then reused it in the fracking process. I thought that was pretty cool.
Okay. What are some of the good things about fracking y'all learned? We talked about some of the bad things like the earthquakes, hazardous chemicals. What are some of the good things that they talked about?
Okay. Well, they were saying like because it produces like a new, well not new, but a better source of energy. So like the gas that they're drilling for is used to like power our homes and our cars and stuff like that. Whereas now we're using like oil and gas, and so it's just a more efficient source of energy. And then with that new source of energy comes like a whole new economy with it. So it like producing more jobs and stuff like that. So that was good, and I think that kind of outweighed the cons.
Okay, I do have a suggestion here. Can you guys write down the cost, write down the benefit, then for each column, and so you write down what is kind of summarize what they say and write down some like bullet point.
Yes.
Then later on you can compare. Okay, this is the cost of having the fracking, and this is the benefit of fracking, and what should we go with? Yeah.
All right, so under cost we had earthquakes and hazardous chemicals. Hold on, I got you, Carly, in just a second. And some of the benefits that you said were the new economic.
Yeah, the new like a new industry.
The new industry.
Well, I guess it's an expansion of the old, because
That's true.
we had natural gas before, but we have more now and it's cheaper.
Car.
I was gonna say it's a lot cheaper, but she just said that.
Oh, okay. What?
Another benefit would be it's environmentally it's not as polluting as your big factories. So it cuts down on air pollution. It also cuts down on carbon emissions. So environmentally, it's a better approach, maybe.
Yeah, and they, because of the coal,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Right. It's not coal.
Yeah.
It's natural gas.
And they talk about that in the book. I don't know how many of you guys read the actual supplemental readings for it, but it was talking about how the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide emissions from natural gas, like burning it and getting it, is actually half that of coal, but the methane production is double that of coal. So it's
trade-off.
Yeah. Yes.
Like another cost it talked about was the off chance that the water reservoirs get polluted.
Groundwater contamination.
And what could that lead to?
That could lead to a whole nother kind of health problems and stuff like that because them aquifers are what we get our water to drink with, and if something happens to that water, we all will miss.
Did you have a hand up back there?
Yeah. I was gonna say that another benefit would be that it was domestic since it's right here in the United States and we wouldn't have to import it from other countries.
It was talking about how disruptive the fracking trucks were, and they're prohibited from operating at night and on the weekends because they're so disruptive.
Yeah.
And then
And
some.
that's a cost, and they kind of addressed it when they
Yeah.
banned at night. But okay, so how can I phrase that?
Disruptive
equipment.
trucks. Yeah, equipment. There you go. Earlier you guys said that it was a lot cheaper. Why is it cheaper now than, say, the 60s? Did you guys read about that? Why is it cheaper?
Why is natural gas cheaper now?
Yeah, natural gas.
I'm trying to remember right now. I wrote that.
All right, time for my little curves. Yes. Okay, so what we have is. And I know you guys love these little curves. So, okay. That and that. Yes, yes. Okay, so. Supply and demand, okay? And just say this is 1950. Okay, my handwriting's horrible, but we'll learn the difference a little bit. Okay, so if in 1950 they could only make so much of it, okay, let's just say 100. I don't know what they'd say of it. Okay, now imagine today they can make so much more. Which direction would the supply curve go to if they can make more of it? Would it go to the right or the left?
Right.
Go to the right.
To the right. Okay, so we're gonna draw it out here. So what does that do for the price?
Bring it down.
It brings it down. So the price goes. So that's kind of what happened. The price of it actually dropped over the past 40 years in fourfold. So it went from $12 per that's a hard thing to say. A British ton?
Million British thermal units.
Yeah. Million British thermal units, it's $12. Now it's $3, which is a quarter of that than in Europe and an eighth of that in Asia. So you have.
Is that price dropped in the US?
Yes.
Oh.
So that's
In
only
Europe-
in the US.
In Europe they pay 12 for it, and in Asia they have to pay 24.
Right now?
While we're paying 3
Oh.
for the same amount.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
How much cheaper? How much of a benefit do we have from that?
Alright, so that's the question.
Okay.
Alright, we have questions.
Or do we want to?
Critical
Okay.
thinking.
What about more costs? Does anyone have any other costs and benefits before we move on?
Well, like the, oh, sorry. Was someone raising their hand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say that because of the way the supply and demand went up and the natural gas got cheaper and it's so much more expensive in Europe and Asia, they're kind of driven to find more alternative energy sources. So it's kind of an environmental cost. Because our natural gas is so cheap, we have no problem with just using it for everything, and there's no driving factor to find cleaner sources of energy.
Okay. So you're saying since it's cheaper here, we're not thinking about making cleaner energy because we don't have to worry about it right now. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That would be on the cost.
contamination?
Yeah.
So, I don't, so they compared the, natural gas energy to other clean energy, sources. What do y'all think about that?
It was like a trade-off, cause like some of the other like natural gases, like there'd be a greater release of this chemical, but it was less in fracking, but fracking does this and this one doesn't do that. So like the way you balance it out, it's kind of even.
And it was talking about other things like things that we think of clean energy, like solar panels. We were researching it, and it actually uses a lot of like chemicals to make the photovoltaic cells inside of them. Like it does that, and like wind turbines take up a lot of energy and are really noisy. So you have to keep that in mind. I mean, not a lot of energy, a lot of space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
And
that kind of-
can kill, birds
yes.
and, yeah.
So wouldn't that like, so like with wind turbines, so like you have to pay off the neighbors, like, sorry, this is gonna be noisy.
Mhm.
So like fracking kind of has like, in some cases, a bigger like input cost, because like they were talking about in the chapter, how like the trucks or like streets aren't meant for like this much use. So then the companies have to pay off the people whose land it's on, then they have to pay to like upgrade the streets and stuff. So it's like a bigger input cost, but with how much you get back, it's kind of worth it.
Yeah, and we wanted to talk about, the cost, the marginal costs and benefits, as compared to other, specifically as compared to other, sources of energy. Do you wanna go through this?
Yeah, sure. All right, so what incentives do like companies have to lower the risk of groundwater contamination? What are some incentives they have towards doing that?
So we have, one of the costs is groundwater contamination, and it actually says in the book, about well-made pipes won't leak. And we won't have this problem of groundwater contamination, so, we wanted to talk about, the incentives. Why would companies make well-made pipes?
Well, because if somebody gets sick, they could take out a lawsuit against the company, so that's a really big expense, and it like publicly destroys their morals and stuff like that, so they don't want lawsuits.
Bad publicity and cost. Anything else? Oh, you first.
Even if it's not humans that are drinking the water, animals could be drinking the water, which can cause massive like environmental damage.
And people are supposed to be helping people, so your incentive to make sure that these why did I- it just that these what
Companies?
no, not the companies, but what they're making. They're
the
making thank you, pipes. American, right? Struggling. And so they're making these pipes. You would hope that they would take the precaution to better take out the chemicals and to make it sturdy and stable so that it wouldn't affect the people, because people should always be looking out for people
Yeah, so moral obligation.
more.
Once an area where people are fracking is like contaminated, once people find out about it, like whether it be from people getting sick or animals getting sick, the company has to evacuate the area before they can use it again and
Yeah.
have to clean it up, so that costs money, or they have to just leave in general,
Yeah.
so there's a development like that.
Anything else?
Thinking on the like monetary value of it, what would happen to the company like if a pipe broke and all the gas was leaking out? That's gas that they can't sell, so they're losing that money and hurting the environment and having to pay for that. Like an example, this isn't natural gas per se, but oil. Whenever you hear BP, what do you think? Like
The oil
Oil.
spill.
exactly. That's not good for your company. That's not what you want. So it takes years to rebuild that, like public relations, like to get people to finally not think of that whenever you do it. All right. So another thing we were talking about was the earthquakes. Like someone mentioned that. I don't remember quite. Yes. So we hear about earthquakes that fracking causes, and it was talking about how they're like little tremors or small earthquakes, but we hear about the bad things that fracking does. Like I myself see on TV, like fracking commercials, like someone's like, no to fracking, but you never hear a no to hydroelectric dams, because those cause earthquakes too. Holding back large bodies of water. Why is that? Like, why is there a stigma against fracking and not other things that cause the same detriments to?
Because a lot of people see things in black and white. So when you think fracking, you think pollution, and as soon as someone hears pollution, they automatically think it's bad. While words associated with like hydroelectric power, like wind or water, is like clean energy. So that's all people really care about.
For like fracking, I feel like it's also newer, so like they don't know all about it yet. So they still have like studies and like they have to figure out if it's really is environmental safe. And then once they find that out, I feel like more people will be on board with it.
Adding on to what she said, dams have always been a part of our system, and basically when the hydro thing, you're building a dam.
Mhm.
So, well, if you're going to build a dam anyway and hold back this water, you might as well get some good out of it. So I think that's how some people would think.
So you think there's added benefits to dams that fracking wouldn't have?
Well, not necessarily. I reckon it's sort of psychological because, like I said, people build dams all the time. And it's kind of something that's always been in our structural system. So they don't think it's as bad to build a dam and then just turn it into an energy source than to dig a hole in the ground and hope you strike something and don't release gases.
All right. Any more on that? Any other input? Okay. We talked about also where, like, in the very beginning, how they shoot water and sand and other chemicals into the ground. Is it like justifiable for them to be like wasting a ton of water? Like, it's a lot of water that they use to do this. Is it justifiable in the end? Because we read in they can clean around 20% of the water and reuse it, like for drinking, and the rest of it is either lost down in the ground or they use it again for another well. Shoot it down. So you had your.
I remember from the reading, like, the biggest comparison, because when they said it was like 4 million or billion tons of water, and I was like, oh, that's a lot of water. But then they said, they were like, but a golf course uses this much or just as much in a week, and the golf course isn't recycling any of it to reuse. So in terms of numbers, yeah, it sounds bad, but I like that they're at least trying to make strides to reuse some of it. And so, like, given that comparison, I think it's just one of those things that you have to live with.
That's where I was going to get on.
Yeah, so, and part of me was like, well, the golf course, they're putting it back into the environment, and it's still clean, you know, as it goes back into the environment, whereas fracking water is dirty and it does need to be recycled, or sometimes it can't be used. They only recycle 20% of it, right? And then the other 80% it can be reused, but
Not for consumption.
yeah.
So is the 20% that they're recycling reused for consumption or reused for fracking?
The 20% they reuse, it can be either used for consumption or for like commercial use. The other 80% is either, they say about 40% is stuck inside, like under the ground, inside the wells where the natural gas was, and the other 40% they use for another well.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
To like use again for
Yeah,
fracking
but it
purposes.
can't be used like for
Infinite amounts of times.
I like to see more people raising hands. Those guys are asking great questions. And I want you to be more active in this discussion because they are not the only one who going to be graded. And your discussion, your answer also going to be graded, okay? And they really, I think they're doing a great job right now. So please be, active and engaged in the discussion.
Can we call on people? That's fine. I'll make sure everyone talks. No, I won't do that. Just raise your hand. Let's go to the marginal.
Okay, so the last one.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about compare the U.S. versus Europe, and what are the marginal costs and benefits, the added costs and benefits of fracking in the U.S. versus Europe. So we touched on it a little bit in the introduction, where you talked about how there's different laws. And we wanted to talk about that some more. What are let's compare the two.
Oh, what if Europe and US? Did I do that wrong? I'm supposed to do Europe
I
and
think
US.
that's well, and then do another one with Europe.
Yes.
Because this has grown and is very popular in the US, but it's not in Europe. And a lot of countries in Europe have actually banned it. So why is that?
Well, so we have this democracy, so we are for the people. So if we're gonna go trounce on someone's land, they're getting some of the income that the big companies are making. They're saying, okay, because we're on your land and your property and you're letting us use it, we're gonna give you some of our money that we make. While in Europe, the governments are set up a little different. So if they say, okay, we're gonna put a fracking company right here in this land, and they're using the land and they're getting the same benefit out of it, but the landowner who has to put up with the noise and the commotion and all the pollution and all this stuff that's going on doesn't get any benefit.
Yeah.
So that would anger the homeowner, because at least when you're in America, sure, it could be loud or it could wake you up or whatever, but you're getting paid.
Yeah.
So there's an incentive.
Yeah.
Right?
So you're getting compensated, basically.
Right.
So a benefit in the US is compensation, while in Europe, you get no compensation. That's a cost for it.
It's the not in my backyard thing. People in Europe are gonna look down upon it and they're not gonna want to have anything to do with it because they don't want it to happen in their backyard. Whereas America are gonna be like, oh, we can get a paycheck. I mean, it's the same thing basically, but Europe is not gonna have popularity with it like we do.
It's a little bit cultural because a lot of countries in Europe are a lot quicker to like pass legislation and ban stuff as soon as like as a precautionary measure, while we'll put something out there and keep it out there until we find out it's bad. So,
How should I word that?
I don't know how you put that on I can see there's a social stigma more, but I don't.
Because in Europe, like when they start researching something, like they might test it, and as soon as they think like there could be a risk, they'll pull it. And they like to like just completely ban stuff, while we'll like keep it out there and study it until things get worse.
I'm gonna throw out a question here. Do you guys know anything about what's happening in Asia, like in China, that relate to this? We don't have, Chinese do not have the property rights of land. Government owns it. Even let's say, I buy a house, okay? And on the contract, it's clearly stated that you own this right of this house for 70 years only. After 70 years, it go back to the government. Yes. So that is just the house. Minimum rights, no, that is totally owned by the government. So that's why, and it's hard to push this thing in Asia. I just want to throw out this thing here.
So it's similar to Europe, but even more.
So
So because in Europe and Asia they're having these problems where the government is using their land and they don't get any benefit, they're having to pay higher for what we have in America because the citizens don't want them to use their land. So they're like, okay, we're not going to use your land, but now we're going to tax you because you're going to have to pay more to bring it in from America because that's where it's being produced the most, which is a toll on the European and the Asians. If they want natural gas and they want it this way, then that takes a toll on their budget. how much money they have.
We have a low. Anyone else? Comparisons between Europe and the US.
I just have a question, I want to ask you guys. So, I mean, in my house, and my heating system is fueled by electricity. And, but 3 years ago when I lived in Pembroke, and I think the heating system fueled by gas. But it was extremely expensive. Actually, in that whole winter, I spent over $1,000 on that. So here we're talking about the natural gas is cheap. I really did not, personally, I have not felt that way. But when I was in China, even, natural gas in China is not as abundant as here, but it's relatively, less expensive than electricity. Okay, so I just want to throw out this question here and see how you guys feel about that. Yeah.
So one thing about fracking is there's actually a pretty limited amount of space you can actually do it, because those resources have to be there, and there are huge spaces in the U.S. where they're not. Fracking just isn't viable because it would be too expensive to extract too few resources. So that might be one of the reasons it's more expensive for some people, because they just can't get it.
One thing, sorry.
Someone in the back. Do you have your hand up?
Okay. Oh, one thing adding on to what Professor she, yeah, I was trying to say if I can say it right. Yeah, okay. Is that she was saying that it cost a lot for her to have it, but that also may be company markup, you know what I mean, trying to get more money out of you, because a lot of people don't know what they should be paying. They just pay what bills come in. So, yeah. Did anyone? I know that I saw a few people have it have a printout of the copy of some of the supplemental readings, or no? I'm gonna draw it up here if not. But if you have them, it's on the first supplemental reading. It's a table, well, not really a table, a diagram that I want to draw. And it was talking about how, as you go throughout, imagine it's a pyramid, okay, of amount of things you have. This is density of how good it is, how much there is of it. So it's really high density up here, but there's not a lot of it. And this is quality. No, this is high quality and this is low quality. So there's a lot, there's a lot of really bad materials that you have to pay a lot for. These, it costs more money the farther down you go to get these. So it doesn't really cost much to get the good materials, but there's not much of it. So as you run out, as we use more and more, it's going to start going away, so that then you'll have to pay more and you won't be getting as good materials. And then you'll be paying even more and more until it's just not even feasible to get it, because it costs more than you're going to make off of it. So that's why a lot of people were talking about in the third, or it's either first or third article, about different energy sources, because even though it's good right now, it won't always be good to make it and to get it. So I just wanted to share that little diagram. I thought it was useful. Okay.
So this is good. This is kind of ties in how we're talking about Europe. If the property rights to food belonged not to the landowner where the food was grown, but instead belonged to the national government, how might this affect the willingness of people to let strangers grow food on their land? So we're talking about, just like it is in Europe with oil and natural gas, what if it was like that here with crops, agriculture?
It's in your book too. If you
Yeah,
didn't
if
get
you'd
the
like to
question.
read the question.
Yeah, it's in your book. It's
That's
the
question
first
number one.
discussion question.
So is it still like you're trying to compare the different countries or?
Well, we're just talking about if you had to, if you didn't own the food that was grown on your land.
Like, what impact would that have in whether we grow it or not?
Yeah. And, yeah,
I mean, if I'm gonna let someone come in and grow, and I'm not gonna get anything, so they're gonna use my resources, they're gonna use my property, and I'm not gonna get anything from it, I'm gonna probably be a selfish American and not let that happen. Because they're taking, whether you're growing things, like if you're a farmer and you have your land, someone else comes in and just wants a little bit of land, they're using up the minerals in the soil, they're using up the water that you could be using, and you're not getting any incentive to let that happen. You're not getting any money back. So you're basically taking a big hit with them using up your minerals and your water and all these things that you could use to make your land more suitable.
You also gotta consider the fact that their sense of property versus our sense of property might be a little bit different. So for us, like we purchased this house, and you have the house and then you have the property that it comes with, like, but then over there you have the house, and like that's it. So their sense of like what my property is and what it's not is like a little bit different. So if we consider it that way, then, you know, personally I'm not sure I would really have a huge problem with it, because they are producing stuff that ultimately might go to me. So while I'm not getting like any direct benefit from it, like they're making stuff that now I can use. So I'm not sure I'd have a huge issue with it.
so if we were aware that we didn't actually own the land, we just owned what was on the land, that would change.
And this like goes with her. The people that don't own any land are going to be relying on the people that do have the land to let people grow on it. So you're going to have other people, and it's not like you're not getting part of the food. I mean, you'd have a whole city that doesn't have land, and you have 200 some acres. Then people are going to be like, why don't you let us grow food on your land? So they would probably not have this problem with it, like she was saying.
How that's going to affect the quality of the land over time?
It wears down the minerals, and all, everything, and then eventually your land will become barren and you won't be able to. So that's why a lot of like farmers will go like piece by piece, and they won't use all of it, because then like while they're using this piece is trying to get refertile, and they're not using it so that it can come back. The minerals can. So if you're using all of it at the same time, well, in a few years it's all gone. While if you section it off and you give it time for the minerals to come back and the rain to fall and whatever, then you're recycling land.
So what if the government was in charge of our land and what we want it? So if someone is rotating crops and taking care, but you still own the land, how does that change it? Because the question is, what if strangers, so basically someone's coming on and just using your land and not taking care of it, but what if someone was taking care of it?
Well, it kind of goes back into that sense where in these other countries, well, if you don't know no different, if that's the way you were brought up, then you really wouldn't be able to say much one way or the other, because that's just that's your livelihood. Like with Miss she, right? What she was talking about in China, where you got lifetime rights to the house, but you don't own the land. The government owns the land. So if like in places like that, it really doesn't matter what you say or do, because it ain't like it's gonna make much of a difference. But because we're over here in America and we own our own land, and that we were grown on our own land, I think it would the idea of somebody coming in and not taking care of our land and ruining it and we not being able to get a dime out of it, I think that would anger a lot of folks.
I think it's interesting because we're hypothesizing about how we would feel with food and how they would feel with food, but the same thing is happening to them. The government is saying, you know, can we do fracking? And they're saying, no, we don't want it because we don't, you know, we're not getting compensation. So it's kind of the opposite of what we would think. They are protesting.
And if the government owns your land and they could do whatever they wanted with it in your farming, would you work as hard or no? No, so like the quality of what you're getting would just, it would just drop. Because if anyone can come on the land and do what they want with it, you're not gonna go out there every day and try as hard as you can. Because you're not gonna get anything from it.
And also there's something worse can happen to the land. Okay, I'll also tell you the example from China. The house I bought several years ago and was in the farmland, really was a town of farmers, farming, okay? But now you look at that town, everything is commercialized. So the government, right now in China, especially the small town and small village, they have a lot of incentive to sell the land to housing development company. Actually, that's happened to where I live right now. You see the high-rise all over the place, but you don't see the farmland anymore. Yeah, so it is very sad because, you know, we have to get, you know, before, you know, we get the local produce, but now we can't, you know, and we have to get produce from another town and from another city because, you know, and there's no farmers, there's no farmland, you know, town government sell all this property to housing development. Of course, the town become much richer, you know, however, you really sacrifice a lot of farmland. That's really extremely, I mean, very, very, you know, and a serious issue happening in China. Yeah.
And does that have to do with, sorry, the because of the farmland that they used previously? Was it the fact that the economy changed and people wanted to industrialize, or was it more of the fact that the farmland was barren and that they had to switch?
They didn't have to switch.
Okay,
That's right.
so.
Yes, right. And but there's another reason is because a lot of people, a lot of farmers, you know, they left to the more industrial part of this part, you know, the city, or even to you know, bigger city to find a job. So you have less people to work on land. So that is one issue, but that is not the most important issue to contribute to this. Most contribute issue is the town government get greedy. They want to make more money, and they are very, very rich right now. Yeah, if you look at that town right now, it's nothing like what happened 20 years ago. Yeah.
And the downside to that though is once you start selling off your farmland and having to buy more and more in, eventually you're gonna be back where you were because you're just buying what you could have gotten for a lot less if you would have done it yourself. So it's like you have to hit equilibrium with it.
Like, we have leasing options in America. My grandma owns like a ton of land and she leases it to farmers and paper companies, but she makes them do like really harsh contracts on like what they can do and what they can't do. But I mean, it's basically like she doesn't have rights to it while they're leasing it once they've signed the contract. So I've kind of seen like the paper companies, they cut down a lot of her trees. But one of her stipulations is for every tree you cut down, when you come back next year or the year after, you have to plant 2 more. So like the leasing, I feel like if we did more of that kind of thing where you lease but you have contracts with stipulations, we probably would have like a really good industry going for food and a lot of the stuff we need.
Yeah, and that ties back, you know, you're getting benefit.
Yeah.
People are using your land, but you are getting benefit, as opposed to just government coming in and saying, there's oil under here, we're taking.
Yeah.
So that's actually related to the concept of ownership. You know, ownership, you know, brings responsibility. You know, if you don't own it, then it's less likely you're going to take good care of it.
Okay, should we move on?
Yep.
Do you wanna read the next one?
Sure, I just have something in my eye. It's great. Okay. So far, most government relations dealing with fracking are written and enforced by state and local governments, rather than the federal government. What are the advantages and disadvantages of local and state regulation compared to federal regulation? To what extent is the nature of the issue important to your analysis? For example, compare issue of increased local traffic to the increased releases of methane into the atmosphere. So let's start with the first thing. What's the benefits and costs of having it like local than federal?
So there aren't like these pockets of natural gas everywhere. So I think there needs to be more like on a case by case basis rather than just like a blanket statement or law about everyone. So if it's handled locally and regulated locally, that makes it so that the communities that don't necessarily have to worry about these big pockets of natural gas aren't as affected due to some of these laws, whereas the places that do have these pockets that can actually count on some like local regulation and not just blanket statements.
So, local will be more specific to each situation.
And kind of going off that, like, I feel like the federal government should maybe have a little bit, like, the local government, it's theirs, and it differs from place to place, and they should definitely be in charge. But I think the federal government should have a couple regulations, or at least it should go by them to make sure, just so that, like, because there's, in any local government and government itself, there can always be corruption or this or that, and so it's always good to have like someone to check, like a backup. So I think that yes, the local government should deal with it, and then someone from the federal government come out, okay, this looks good, just a self-check kind of thing.
That's going on a lot of what you said. It's a lot of like what our country is based on is the federal government will have like a blanket statement for all of us to follow, but then it's up to under following those rules and regulations, we interpret them individually. So I think that's basically like what we need under like fracking, to have the government say, all right, this is what everyone needs to follow, but then it's under interpretation like within the states. Like you all have to follow this, but apply it as necessary. So that.
So what would be some benefits of just having federal control? We heard about negatives. What are some benefits?
Everything being the same across the board, and no like differentiation between like North Carolina's fracking and like California's.
Yeah. It'll help the government's economy as a whole instead of just helping certain states that are actually doing it. It should help the whole economy.
So if it was under a federal thing, it would give a national economic boost.
Yeah.
Also, I realized I said the negative for federal, but with the federal, if something needed to be changed, like we found that fracking is really, really bad if you do this. So now you don't have, if it's just federal, you can just change the law, and everyone has to abide by that law. Whereas if it's just local or just like state regulation, then you have to go like by state basis and not like everyone. So change is a little bit easier.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking about was expertise might be greater on a federal level than they talked about state, which is one thing. State would probably have some expertise, but as far as like counties go. Anything else?
I would think like at a federal level, the standard for the quality of fracking would be better. Like if you leave it up to the local states to be like, oh well, we've decided that this way is a better way for fracking. I think that could pose a lot more threats and be a lot more dangerous versus if we had a universal standard for what everyone needs to do in order to be safe and efficient.
More information.
Anything else? Alrighty.
So, to what extent is the issue relevant to the analysis? So, we're talking about the release of methane versus truck traffic. How does that guide your thinking about it? So, for example, should federal government be in charge of the truck traffic laws, or should state government be in charge of the methane release?
As far as truck laws go, I think that falls more under specific the situation, because if let's say if over here in this country it's densely packed, not the country but town, it's densely packed, and then you're gonna go and add more trucks and tearing up the roads and everything, well, there should be different regulations for that than over here on this town next over, where there's hardly, it's like one stoplight town, there ain't nobody in there. And the truck's gonna be going through there, but it won't be as big as a deal there as it would be over here. So I think that should be a local type deal, because every little town is situated differently. That's not something that you can really kind of cross board.
So there's a difference.
And different towns have more pollution, like New York City has got a way higher pollution rate than we do right here. So if you add more methane to that environment, it's gonna make it worse for them than it would for us.
I think that the local government should definitely control truck trafficking, because, you know, you have your pollution and you have the tearing up the roads. But another thing you have is, you know, how early can the trucks come? You know, how can they, because of the noise pollution, and if you're in a denser community with a lot of people and you're in people's backyards at 5 a.m., they're probably not going to be too happy. While you can get away with that when the population is less dense, and there's more land, and you're like, okay, this isn't going to bug people as much as this. So the noise pollution is another thing that the local government should be able to regulate.
That, and it can't, like, we're talking about it's either this or that, and it doesn't have to be, like, you could have a set of rules, and then the state and local can build on top of that. Like, you could set it for 5 a.m. as earliest, but some people could say 6 or 7, but not before 5. Something like that.
Which way is more efficient? I'm going to throw out this question here.
For us, or are you asking?
I'm asking everyone here.
Everyone
here. Which way is more efficient? To have a central control, or have a local has some control? And the second question is efficiency everything in this context?
Is efficiency everything?
Yeah. So the first question is what is efficient to have central control, and the second question is efficiency everything.
I want to, like, build in what you said. I want to take a vote, like, of how many people think local versus central, like, government. So everyone, like, raise your hand for one thing, even if you have no idea what we're talking about. If you're, like, drawing a blank, raise your hand for. All right, if you think
we have to
local government should be the ultimate deciding factor in the laws and regulations, okay, raise your hand. So how many is? Wait, all right, raise them high, high, loud and proud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. In federal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are you? Which one are you?
I'm for federal.
All right. Did you vote?
I did not vote.
Oh. Would you like to vote?
Abstain.
Okay.
I'm not with my 2 cents to add to that. See, I think that there should be a combination. I think the federal government should have a set list to just kind of where everything's kind of standardized, and then they should allow the local government to put in their 2 cents where it's needed.
So overall, I think it's more efficient to have the federal government be like over everything. It's like, these are the rules, that's it, follow them, done. But in this case, I really don't think efficiency is always the best. Like, it should be a combination of the two. So that way, you know, as it's already been said, like, depending on the population and where it is and what it would affect, then that way it can also be, like, those basic rules can be built upon. So I don't think everything should always be for the 100% efficient way.
I don't think fracking should be legal in the first place, so I don't have like the strongest opinion about it. But if I had to pick one, it would be federal, because you kind of need someone like putting in like strict regulations on something that's like controversial like this, because if you have a bunch of different rules about it, it causes a lot of conflict and makes it a lot easier for companies to like scrape the rules. And also it's just more difficult to control, because like if a fracking truck is like transporting goods like across state lines and the rules are different, then it causes like a lot of trouble for them and makes it like more of an incentive for them to go against the rules to get things done easier and cheaper. Yeah.
Like, overall, yeah, federal would be better, but somebody in a federal position does not know what's going on right now in Pembroke. So it would be really irritating to just be able to, just to have to deal with those laws. And I would be kind of pissed off if somebody's drilling down the road at 5 a.m. while I have class next morning, or that morning.
Yeah.
So.
I want to take another vote real quick, just because she said that. You don't have to vote, like, some people don't know, and if you don't, like, know, don't vote in this one, because it would kind of throw it off. If you think fracking should be legal or not, or if you have no clue, we're going to have 3 little categories, okay? So, legal, no clue, and not legal. There we go. All right, let's start with legal. Legalizing it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. If you're on the fence.
I'm going to risk my hand.
All right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And
Yeah, me too.
8. And not legal. 1, 2, 3. Are you voting not legal? No. Anna. Okay. I know she said it earlier, but then she didn't raise her hand. I was like. Okay, so. Okay. I don't know if that was everyone, but okay.
Does anyone think that the state would be more efficient? We have reasons why the state would be better. Would it be more efficient?
Anything at all?
I can't tell.
Hmm?
I can't tell, like, would it be better
Yeah,
or
it's-
versus efficient?
And this is
Yeah.
why I don't want to be a policy. Someone's gonna not
So-
like you.
And I think overall, it's easier to judge overall than just efficiency, because there's lots of other variables. Like, there's a lot more than efficiency, I think. What about efficiency? Is efficiency our decision maker? Should it be in this case?
I mean, gonna say what everyone else is saying, but efficiency is important. But you have to take the other factors in. You know, people's prosperity and happiness should be included in there, and if that's waking people up at 5 a.m., and that's probably not going to be very happy for a lot of people. So, with that being said, you have to take, you know, even the minor stuff. Your environmentalists are going to say this truck traffic's too much, and you know, and everyone, there's all these different variables, different factors. So efficiency is definitely important. Like, you want to make it as cheap and effective as possible, but you have to take in other factors.
Yeah, adding to what he says, we live in a society where efficiency equals, in most people's minds, cost less, better. That's not always the case, but that's like when back 100 years ago when they was regulating, just giving an example, the railroads. that was did by a local thing until the federal government got a hold of it and standardized it, because in the local sense it was like, well, this train can only go on this track and then it gets this far and then it has to go to another track and go like this. But then the federal government says, oh, no, you know what, we're gonna do this. And then it was cross-bordered, and then you could move stuff from one side of the country to the other side and never change trains. And so I kind of think that like adding, like efficiency is important, and in most, and I think in our society now, like most people at the top, if they had to choose between what is better and what is more efficient, they would go more efficient, because they would think that would be the kind of deciding factor, because it would be cheaper, which we're already in enough debt as it is, so they're going to be thinking, well, this ain't going to cost as much, so in the long run, it'll be better for everybody altogether. That's my opinion on that.
And we can throughout the economic concept, we learn opportunity cost, and there is opportunity cost for efficiency. Okay, and at the country level, sometimes equity, fairness is the cost of efficiency. You know, that's why we have tax. You know, and the tax system is the redistribution of the wealth. You know, and if we eliminate that, you know, from economic point of view, that's probably brings the most efficient market, but it will sacrifice equity and fairness.
I saw this, like, I've seen this triangle for years and I like it. You can only have 2 of these. You can't have all 3. It's like low price, efficiency, and high quality. You can only have 2 of those, and you have to figure out what's worth sacrificing. Are you going to pay more? Or are you going to have it done slower? Or are you going to have lower quality items? So, like, this is McDonald's right here, okay? It's efficient, low price, walk in, walk out, you got your food, okay? This is like Zaxby's, efficient, high quality, but the price, no. And then you have low price and high quality is like something I can't think of right now, but that's very slow and what?
Like maybe like a better restaurant where you have to like go in and sit down.
So it's like, yeah, there we go. It's like Wow or Birds, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. It's not as cheap. I mean, it's not as like expensive, and it's all right food. It just takes 4 hours to get a chicken tender.
Or it could be like the grocery store, because you have to go buy your groceries.
Excellent discussion, guys. An excellent question.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I'd like number 5 on there. I like number 5.
So, if national governments and other nations agreed to share the profits from fracking with the landowners on whose property drilling takes place, how might that change attitudes towards the process? So, Europe was different, basically.
If people are getting incentives, they're much more likely to do whatever the government wants them to. So attitudes are probably, for the most part, are going to change for, yes, fine, frack on my land, it's fine. Like, it's not a big deal as long as I get money. While probably they're not gonna consider the environmental costs, all these other costs, because they're like, oh, I'm about to make money off of what they've been doing and they haven't been giving me money. So the incentives are probably gonna overlook all the other costs, I would say.
Someone else. Okay. Another thing you can think about is if they start doing that and there's more like fracking in Europe, what do you think that would do to the market? Like, since right now the U.S. is exporting a lot of like natural gas and things, like Russia, it talks about in the book, is basically the main supplier of Europe's natural gas. So what would happen to countries that are exporting their goods? What would happen to them and their prices if everyone else actually started doing it?
It would hurt those countries because Europe that depends on Russia, they would have more natural gas reserves and their prices would go down. So yeah, they wouldn't want to buy from the other countries.
And then that would hurt the other countries in ways that their prices would actually go up.
How would it affect us? This is question 6, basically.
Does it affect us?
Would it affect us? How would it affect us?
I don't think it really does, because it just isn't.
I would think that it probably would, because every time America exports a good, they mark it up enough so that it's paying, for the transportation and also for what it's worth. And of course, more profit. So there's marked up. You take away that export, and they're making it, I mean, that could be huge it could be a huge decrease because we rely on countries to want our natural gas that we use and that we get from the fracking process. And so if you take that away, whether it's Asia or Africa or Europe or whoever, if they start doing it, they don't need us. And then that's an industry that, if you don't agree with fracking, you're like, yes, it's gone. But if you do, or you like more money, or whatever the case is, that's an industry that's gone now.
Yeah.
So it can decrease the economy as a whole,
Yeah.
if you look at it.
We would have less exports.
And our exports would be worth less.
Mm-hmm.
Because Russia wouldn't want to pay to have us ship them stuff if they can make it and Europe can make it, so we would have more competition. So it's like with the prescription drugs that we were talking about before. With more competition, it's a race to see who can do it fastest and the cheapest. And then we have one last question, number 4.
Pennsylvania and New York are adjacent states that both have large amounts of natural gas-rich shale underground. Coal mining has a long and important history in Pennsylvania. In contrast to New York, where there has been essentially no coal mining historically, use economic analysis to predict how people, including politicians in the two states, have responded to the opportunities for extracting natural gas by fracking. How might attitudes towards fracking differ depending on whether the people involved live in rural areas where the fracking is likely to take place, or in the cities where there will presumably be no fracking? So,
Well, the people in Pennsylvania aren't going to want it because they have a lot of jobs and stuff in coal mining. And the people in New York aren't going to have to sacrifice all those jobs, so they're probably going to be more willing to have it.
And then we've already covered a lot of the rural and city, like, I don't think we need to beat a dead horse. Like, we've went over that quite a bit. On the other side, though, to what you were saying, would they be more inclined to accept it in Pennsylvania, since they're used to doing things like going into the ground and pulling stuff out? Would they be more...
Probably not, because they wouldn't want to upset their coal industry that they already have. Because if you bring in different people to frack, that displaces or cuts into the profit of the people who are coal mining, and they have a history and an industry there with probably towns and economies based off of coal mining, because there are a lot of such things as coal towns, and a lot of these places might kind of break down or go bankrupt if fracking comes in to start its own industry.
So I think kind of what you were saying, I agree that that could happen, but also if you're looking at the other hand, it's much safer probably than coal mining. You hear about coal mining and deaths and the traps, and coal is it's good to use but disastrous to our environment. And so with that perspective, maybe these people are thinking, okay, it's safer working conditions. We're polluting less, and it's an easier job or whatever. I could see them saying, okay, let's go ahead and bring this in because we're used to kind of the hands-on and energy kind of thing, but it's safer, so I can use that.
so safety issues.
Alright. Last thing, did anyone have anything else for that question? Before I move on? Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna add that might not be the case because fracking's a lot more of a specialized job than coal mining is. It's less labor, but you need more knowledge and experience to do it. So the same people who were coal miners might not be able to go and frack. So it really wouldn't make a difference to them if it was safer. They'd just be losing their jobs.
So what about the difference between how politicians would view this and how regular working people would view it? I think you touched on it a little bit, but.
Someone we haven't heard from today. There you go.
I feel like politicians are gonna be for it because it's gonna bring money. Anything that's gonna be bring money, politicians
It's the way to our heart. It's what politicians are.
I agree with her, but I also feel that like she said, the politicians would be like, you know, let's do it, but then the regular people, they wouldn't think about how the regular people would lose their jobs or like how their lives would be affected by it.
They're like, but in the same sense, they might go with what the people are choosing because you want to get reelected, you want to be liked, you want to stay in your position, so it could go either way.
In the same vein as that, when you have like a town or a state that has a really like long established industry, the government can get a little corrupted with the coal industry paying them off and having their like set system going, so they wouldn't be happy about some other industry coming in. So the politicians might want to keep their prides and whatnot.
Well, that concludes our discussion. You guys were great.
Guys, and I hear a lot of great discussion from you guys, and I remember who did those. I remember very well. Every class who have spoken, who have not, I remember very well. Okay, and the next presentation, you guys, right? You guys going to lead the discussion on. Yeah, on the Thursday here. And before you go, I'm going to call your name, take attendance here, okay?